should be on. Microphone should be on. So today we'll be going over seed plants, specifically gymnosperms and angiosperms. And we'll be also going over the review for exam number 2, and we'll also be going along with the practice questions. I haven't gone through the practice problems, but I have gone through uh, the review. So we'll be doing the practice problems together. And also the question. And also the review. So, seed plants originated about 360 million years ago and became the dominant producers in most terrestrial ecosystems. In addition to seeds, the following are all common to seed plants. So they have reduced gametophytes, which meaning they're microscopic gametophytes. Heterospory, which means that the sporophytes make both microspores and megaspores. They also have ovules and pollen. Pollen is what fertilizes the egg. We'll be going over that in the angiosperm life cycle. And ovules is also found in, both gymnosperms and angiosperms. So the advantages of reduced gametophytes. So like we said, the gametophytes are microscopic, and they develop from the spores retained within the tissues of the parent sporophyte. The gametophyte is also protected and obtains nutrients from the sporophyte, just like in the bryophytes, where the sporophyte is protected by the gametophytes, and the gametophyte gives nutrients and sugars to the non-photosynthetic sporophyte in bryophytes. But for seed plants, it's the complete opposite. The gametophyte obtained its nutrients and protection from the sporophyte. As we see here in the mosses and non-vascular plants, the gametophyte is dominant, while the sporophyte is reduced and dependent on the gametophyte for nutrition. And here we see angiosperms and gymnosperms. We see that sporophyte is dominant and the gametophyte is reduced, dependent on the surrounding sporophyte tissue for nutrition. So the ovule consists of megasporangium. So megasporangium make megaspores, and those megaspores contain the female gametophyte. So it consists of a megasporangium, megaspore, and one or more protective integuments. So this is the megasporangium. The micropyle is the opening to the megasporangium. So we have the integument. Think of this as a shell. The spore wall is just the wall around the megaspore. Oh, Alexa, stop. The spore wall is around the megaspore, which protects the megaspore. The megasporangium is this whole egg, and the pollen grain is what fertilizes the egg. And we'll be talking about that in angiosperms and also gymnosperms. So, in pollen and production, a microspore develops into a pollen grain consists of a male gametophyte, which is enclosed in a pollen wall. So pollination is pretty simple, and is the transfer of pollen to a part of the seed plant containing the ovules. Pollen eliminates the need for a film of water and can be dispersed by great distances by air or animals. If you remember from non-vascular and vascular plants, seedless non-vascular and vascular plants, they're restricted to moist environments. So gymnosperms and angiosperms will thrive in drier conditions, and they can spread through more climates. As long as there's wind, they will reproduce through pollination. or bite through animals. Although some gymnosperms, I forgot to mention this, some gymnosperms retain the flagellated sperms but lost the angiosperms. I believe that is in Ginkgophyta have flagellated sperm, yes, and cycads or cycads also have flagellated sperm. So ginkgos and the ginkgophyllum and the ginkgo, well, the ginkgophyta and the cicadophyta have flagellated sperm. So here we have an unfertilized ovule, which we explained right here, and here we have a fertilized ovule. Here we have the male gametophyte in the pollen tube, and it's remember it's the female gametophyte. This is the egg nucleus. We'll be talking about that more in depth. Well, not more in depth, more specifically in this cycle right here, I believe. Right here. Same concept. It's literally the same concept. So gymnosperms bear naked seeds, typically on cones. So gymno means naked in Latin, or Latin. Latin. I still have trouble saying specific words. I think it's Latin. In Latin, gymnosperms means naked, and sperms means seeds, typically on cones. So pine trees have pine cones, and they have female pine cones and male pine cones. The seeds are exposed on sporophylls that form on cones. So most gymnosperms are cone-bearing plants. So this is a cypress, and here it's little cones, or their cone-bearing plant, or its cone thing, its cone structure. And we'll be talking about the life cycle of a pine. There's three key features of a seed plant life cycle. It is the miniaturization of their gametophytes, production of seeds, and the transfer of sperm to ovules by pollen. So those are the three key features. Oh, did I forget? Did I forget to? Oh yeah, I did forget to talk about this slide. So let's backtrack a bit. So what is the evolutionary advantage of seeds? Well, first, the advantages is that seeds can remain dormant for many, many years until favorable conditions arise. Unlike zygosporangium, zygosporangium can endure uh, unfavorable environments, but not quite as long as a seed. They have a steady supply of stored food, aka the food supply formed by the endosperm, and they may be transported long distances by wind or by animals. So some seeds are carried away by the wind, and some animals eat the fruits that contain the seeds, and the seeds are in the animal, and then the animal does its thing. The seeds pass through the animal's digestive tract and out through the animal, and the animal could have walked, I don't know, 50 miles away where he had his meal containing the seeds, and therefore spreading the plant. Here's a gymnosperm seed with its food supply, the embryo, the seed coat, and the spore wall. So here we'll be talking about the. So when we think of pine cones, we think of when we think of pine cones, we usually think of this right here, and that is actually a female or ovulate cone. The ovulate cone produces um, the female gametophyte, but this here where you see a yellow cone, a smaller cone, it's called what's a pollen cone. The pollen cone makes pollen. So the male cone has microsporangia, and within that microsporangia, there's microsporangium. And through meiosis, the microsporangium will create microspores, and those microspores will become pollen grains. The pollen grains will then will be will find itself at the, is it called, micropyle, the micropyle, until the megaspore matures. Once the megaspore matures, it will grow a pollen tube, and the pollen tube injects the sperm, and then the seed becomes fertilized. And once it becomes fertilized, the seed eventually germinates and becomes a seed. So, let me rephrase that again. Pollen grain meets at the micropyle of the ovule. The megasporangium creates megaspores. Megaspores will be turned into the female gametophyte. Then a pollen tube would grow towards the female gametophyte, and through that pollen tube, two sperm will go down that pollen tube and fertilize the egg. Fertilization occurs, there's an embryo, or a new sporophyte, there's a food reserve, the seed coat, and the seeds emerge. So there's one seed, two seeds. And then, so, you know what a seed does, you just plant it on the ground and starts growing, cycle starts all over again. From the first time cones appear, it takes nearly 3 years to produce mature seeds from fertilized ovules. The scales of each ovulate, cones separate at maturity and are dispersed by wind. So, at the end of the Carboniferous, conditions became drier that once favored, well, drier. Remember that Carboniferous was once a moist and wet place, and it favored seedless vascular plants. Well, now since conditions became drier, gymnosperms and angiosperms were the dominant ones. Specifically, gymnosperms were the dominant. So, gymnosperm diversity. So, angiosperms now dominate most terrestrial ecosystems. Through gymnosperms remain the most important part of Earth's flora. But since gymnosperms are probably my favorite type of phylum, I like the gymnosperms. So we'll be talking about the gymnosperms consist of 4 phyla. The cicadophyta. Individuals have large cones and palm-like leaves. Unlike most seed plants, cicads have flagellated sperm. These thrive in the Mesozoic, but they had their time and they're now endangered. The ginkgophyta, these are one of my favorites. I like their leaves. They're fan-like. I really want one of these trees' leaves. They're kind of cool. And they turn pretty colors in the fall. So the phylum consists of a single living species. So there's only one species in this tree. It's called Ginkgo biloba. Only in China, only native in China. Like cicads, this group also has flagellated sperm. It has a high tolerance to air pollution, and it makes it pretty popular in cities. Gnetophyta, this phylum comprises 80 species in 3 genera: Gnetum, Epihedra, oh my god, and Welwitschia. I think I said that right. Hopefully I did. Species vary in appearance, and some are tropical, whereas others live in deserts. So Epihedra is Mormon tea. If you go to Utah, or like the desert, specifically the Great American Desert, you will find Mormon tea. So it turns out that it stopped recording around here, I believe. Right here, I think it stopped recording by the end of the slide, and I was all the way down here, like all the way down here, and explaining eudocots and monocots when I realized that I was not recording. So I'm gonna have to redo like 10 slides. So starting with the gonadophyta. Actually, start with the gonadophyta. The gonadophyta, there's about 80 species of three genre? Yeah, genre, I guess. Gonadum, Epihedra, and Welwitschia. Species vary in appearance, and some are tropical, whereas others live in deserts. Uh, I'm more familiar with this one, Epihedra. This is Mormon tea, the common name for this. This is found in Utah and the Great American Desert. The Coniferophyta is one of my favorite phylums. Have woody cones, but some have fleshy cones, and most conifers are evergreens and carry out photosynthesis all year round. So my favorite pine tree or Coniferophyta is the Douglas fir, and then comes the redwoods or sequoias, and third comes juniper. I love juniper. It smells so nice. Anthrophyta consists of all angiosperms, and they have two key adaptations, fruits and flowers. A flower is an angiosperm structure that's specialized for sexual reproduction. And flowers, this could be a flower, you know, and flowers are cool because flowers are nice. Some flowers smell bad, and those bad smelling flowers attract flies because flowers have a specific pollinator, whether it's bees, mosquitoes, dragonflies, it doesn't matter. It has to be a pollinator. So here we have the anatomy of a flower. So this right here, the stamen, contains the anther. The anther is what produces the male gametophyte, while the ovary produces the female gametophyte, female, and this produces the male. So this long neck is called a style. The top of the style is called a stigma, and the ovary is this little lump here. Here we have the sepal. Sepals are like little green petals. The green petals are called sepals, while the colorful petals are called petals. Pretty simple, right? A fruit is formed when the ovary wall thickens and matures. So as this here thickens and matures, it becomes the fruit. The fruit protects the seeds and aids in the dispersal. Like I said, an animal. Let's put an example: a bear. A bear would eat the fruit, more specifically a berry. That berry contains a seed, and once the bear poops it out, the berry germinates and grows into a bush. So seeds can be carried by wind, water, or animals to new locations. And we'll be talking about the angiosperm cycle. So the flower, the sporophyte, is composed of both male and female structures. Male gametophytes are contained with pollen grains produced by the microsporangia of anthers, and the female gametophyte or embryo sac develops within an ovule contained within an ovary at the base of the stigma. So let's start with the ovary. So the ovary, actually we'll flip to that page. So the ovary contains megasporangium. The megasporangium will create 4 megaspores, 3 die. Then the surviving megaspore becomes the female gametophyte. Now switching gears to the anther, which is the male gametophyte producing structure. So the anther will produce microspores, and the microspores will turn into pollen grains. Pollen grain contains a generative cell, a tube cell, and a tube nucleus. And once the pollen grain is on top of a stigma, as you see here, the pollen tube grows down the ovary into the micropyle. So here's the pollen tube, and it will grow all the way down to the style and through the micropyle. Then the generative cell will, so this is a generative cell, will turn into two sperm, travel down the tube, down the pollen tube, and fertilize egg and polar nuclei. The egg turns into a zygote, and the polar nuclei will turn into an endosperm. The endosperm is right here. The endosperm is what creates the food storage for the embryo. The process in which the two sperm fertilize the egg and the polar nuclei is called double fertilization. So once double fertilization occurs, the ovary wall thickens, it becomes a fruit containing the seed, and then the seed gets eaten by an animal, and then the whole cycle starts all over again. Let's skip all this. So there's two main types of angiosperms. There's monocot and eudicote. Eudicote have two cotyledons, and cotyledons is within a seed, the embryo consists of a root and one or two seed leaves called a cotyledons. I think I said that right. So a eudicote has two, a monocot has one, and the eudicote has veins usually net-like, while veins in a monocot is just simple and parallel. Stems on a monocot are scattered around, unorganized. Vascular tissue is scattered, while in eudicotes, they're more sophisticated and their vascular tissue is arranged in a ring. Eudicotes have a taproot, a main root with various branching smaller roots, while monocot roots have a fibrous root system, meaning it's just scattered around. There's no main root. Nothing's branching off each other. And the monocot has one opening in the pollen grain, while the eudicote has three openings in the pollen grain. Floral organs usually in multiples of 4 or 5, and for the monocot, floral organs usually in multiples of 3. So I suggest going over these two and remembering all these differences. When I mean all of them, I mean all of them. Skip all these. So monocots are about 1/4 of angiosperms, about 70K species are monocots. The largest groups are orchids, grasses, and palms. And eudicotes, more than 2/3 of angiosperms, about 170K species are eudicotes. Eudicotes include the large ligum family and the economically important rose family. This is a eudicote. So evolutionary link with animals. So animals such as insects and flowers both evolved with each other. Animals have, not the animals, plants have developed spikes and thorns to protect themselves from certain animals. And flowers would benefit with each other, with insects. Flowers with bilateral symmetry of bee can pollinate in any direction, while in I said that wrong. This is bilateral symmetry. This is, what do you call it? I forgot. Radial symmetry, yes. So flowers with radial symmetry, so this is radial symmetry, radial for R for radial. Bees or a pollinator can pollinate the plant from any direction. While in bilateral symmetry, the bee is restricted to this part of the flower. This decreases gene flow because it's restricting the bee in pollinating, and it allows more groups to split. Human welfare depends on seed plants. So seeds are key sources of food, fuel, and wood products and medicine. Most of our food comes from angiosperms. So 6 crops, wheat, mice, maize, potatoes, cassava, and sweet potatoes yield 80% of the calories consumed by humans. So that's a pretty good chunk of our diet. And we really depend on angiosperms because they produce food for us. Our reliance on seed plants makes preservation of plant diversity critical. Oops, I did not mean to do that.